You're tuned into That's Life, where we celebrate the beauty, the chaos, and the wonder of real life. Sometimes it makes you laugh, sometimes it makes you cry, but it always makes you feel. Settle in. We're just getting started. It was a wonderful autumn day. Against the backdrop of the blue sky, the trees, covered in gold and crimson, radiated a warm glow. The clear air was intoxicatingly fresh, carrying the sense of damp earth and fallen leaves. In the old park, a man sat on a bench watching a large dog. The dog, with luxurious golden fur shimmering under the rays of the unusually bright autumn sun, raced between the trees across the carpet of fallen leaves with obvious delight. Suddenly, he braked sharply and plunged headfirst into a pile of leaves with full force, burying himself and raising a multicolored whirlwind. Crouching low to the ground, the dog froze and looked at the man. He snorted loudly several times, trying to free his nose from clinging cobwebs and leaf particles. Grabbing a small branch, the dog dashed toward the bench. "Well, old friend," the man said, gently stroking the dog's back as he ran up and carefully wiping a cobweb from his nose. "You're playing like a puppy today." The dog lifted his muzzle, and his large, shiny eyes stared into the man's face. His tail wagged furiously, and his whole body twitched impatiently. The dog sat down, lifted a paw, and looking questioningly at the man, whimpered softly. "Calm down!" The man laughed cheerfully. "What's gotten into you today? Did you come here to play with me?" "No, I can't." "It'll pass later. Others will be jumping then, but around me." The man laughed softly again. Only this time the laugh sounded bitter. "If only Daniel were here with us. He would have run with you." The man suddenly fell silent, his face twitching as if in pain. He added, pushing the words out with difficulty, "And if Mary were here with us, she, I'm sure, would have jumped with you. I remember all your tricks. She taught you that, didn't she?" The dog, hearing the sounds of a beloved voice and familiar words, yelped and wagged his tail wildly. He sat down next to the bench, still holding the broken branch in his teeth. Evidently, he hadn't entirely given up hope of involving the man in a cheerful game. However, he was clearly happy just sitting nearby and feeling the touch. Robert, continuing to mechanically stroke the dog's head and habitually running the silky ears through his fingers, inhaled the satisfying breath of the delicious, fresh autumn air and closed his eyes. Memories, joyful and bitter, bright and sad, suddenly flooded him. His family wasn't particularly wealthy. Eleanor worked as a librarian her whole life and joked a little bitterly that, fortunately, she managed to retire before the internet killed all libraries. George worked as a foreman at a factory, and all his brief free time was spent rustling newspapers. He looked suspiciously at his wife and demanded good grades from Daniel. Daniel, who loved his mother dearly, also feared his father a little, although he loved him with a strange, forced affection. George was a stranger to Daniel, incomprehensible and unkind. It was terrible, but Daniel couldn't change his attitude towards his father. Perhaps, as he grew older, the boy might have been able to understand his father better, to improve their relationship. But there wasn't enough time for that. George died suddenly. The 9-year-old boy was left with his mother, who, after her husband's death, grieved as if she had lost a loving man, not a gloomy, perpetually dissatisfied husband. After school, the young man enrolled in an institute to study engineering. He had doubts about his choice of profession. A relative came to his rescue, his mother's brother. Uncle Frank had a small garage workshop where he repaired and resold cars. All this fluff, all these lawyer types and merchants, it's all temporary, needed today, gone tomorrow. He rumbled in his smoke-roughened bass, listening to his nephew's doubts. And what kind of work, God forgive me, is that for a real man, shuffling papers and cheating others? Bah! But what I do is real work, man's work. Uncle Frank straightened up proudly and pounded his chest with a rather large fist marked with ingrained machine oil. And I'll always have clients and work. I'll always earn a piece of bread and butter and even caviar if I want. And you, young man, why don't you come work for me? I'll get you into the trade. You'll start doing what they only teach you theoretically in your institutes. Besides, you'll start earning some money. Stop living off your mother. This was an argument, and a very serious one. The young man had been trying to earn money here and there for a long time, but all of it, along with his mother's modest pension and his even more modest student stipend, was barely enough to live on. Working at Uncle Frank's workshop somehow clicked for him right away. He turned out to be a person with an innate technical knack and intuition. He was interested in everything he saw and did there, and he wanted to know and be able to do even more. Yes, boy, your hands are certainly in the right place, Uncle Frank would say. Give those hands more brains, and you'll be priceless. Keep learning, he would bark sternly as a form of encouragement. Robert learned easily with pleasure. In the evenings and on weekends, he worked in the workshop, quickly gaining practical experience. After just a year, he was confidently entrusted with independent car repairs, starting with simple cases, but over time, increasingly responsible and complex ones. Time passed quickly, and 5 years later, by the time he finished the institute, he was already an accomplished mechanic who, despite his youth, enjoyed considerable authority among car owners, constantly worried about endless breakdowns. Robert, this is wonderful. I'm so happy. I'm so proud of you. Eleanor proudly stroked her son's new diploma with her palm. This is a very proper profession for a man. Yes, Mom. You think so? Robert looked at his mother playfully. But if I were a lawyer now, that would be more prestigious, and my hands would be clean, he added, looking at his palms, covered in calluses, small scrapes, and indelible spots of machine oil. Nonsense, son. My dear brother, of course, talks a lot of rubbish, but he's right about this. You have a wonderful man's profession, Eleanor smiled. Don't laugh, son, but I've always thought the ideal family is when the husband is an engineer and the wife is a doctor. Mom, you're something else, Robert burst out laughing. Why a doctor specifically? Oh, that's silly. I, for example, could definitely never, ever fall in love with a female doctor. I think they're all a bit cold. Robert and Eleanor laughed cheerfully and were happy. The categoricalness with which he judged female doctors was not accidental. It was difficult to explain, but something related to medicine had caused him unpleasant feelings since early childhood. He desperately sabotaged trips to the clinic, screamed during appointments, and hid from the pediatrician who came to the house. As an adult, Robert never even went to the clinic, being a healthy man and completely convinced that a cough and a runny nose were not reasons to die. He habitually ignored medicine, just as he ignored seasonal colds. However, this time he couldn't avoid visiting medical institutions. He needed certificates to renew his driver's license. "Who's last?" he asked, approaching the office door where others like him, sufferers, sat along the wall. "Not last, but next." "I am," one of them mumbled, and receiving no response, looked up at the newcomer. "You'll be after me." "Hey, you'll be after me. Do you hear? Man, are you deaf or something?" The man indignantly tried to get his attention, but the newcomer neither heard nor saw anything around him, except an incredible, almost unearthly creature floating down the shabby clinic corridor. The magical vision, in the form of a short, slender, young woman in a white coat, fluttered past the frozen man and disappeared behind the office door. He sank into a chair next to the annoyed next man in line, bewildered, and suddenly felt his heart pounding. He entered the office in a semi-conscious state, glad it wasn't an examination. A young woman sat at the desk by the window, and the sun's rays, tangled in strands of her reddish hair, created a halo effect around her head. "Hello, come in, sit down," a voice he thought angelic said. "Any complaints? Are you taking any medications?" she asked, without looking up, quickly writing something on a form in front of her on the desk. "What?" he stupidly repeated, unable to take his eyes off the doctor's golden glow. "Are you taking any medications?" She looked up and gazed attentively at his face. Robert's breath caught. Blood rushed to his cheeks, and his legs trembled. What was all the poor man could stammer out. "All right, let me see your hands," she said decisively, walking up to the man sitting like a statue, and he caught a light, barely perceptible scent of perfume. "Roll up your shirt sleeves higher. Higher still, please. Good. You can lower them. Look at me. No, not like that." She reached out and gently lifted the man's head, looking closely into his face. "Are you feeling unwell? Just please don't answer that." "What?" he predictably said. "All right, sir," she said, looking at his documents. "Your behavior is, to put it mildly, a little strange. What's wrong?" She looked very carefully at his face again. "I love you, doctor," Robert said, bewildered. The doctor froze. Her face, professionally focused, suddenly looked confused. "Do you need this certificate that badly?" she suddenly asked softly, sitting down next to him. "I'll write you the certificate, sir. You don't have to go to such extremes for it." "No, doctor, no. This isn't for the certificate. This is for life." And the man, looking directly into her eyes, laughed loudly. A few months later, they were married. Eleanor, happy, incredibly radiant with this happiness, constantly caught her son's eye, and several times, unable to resist, she gestured towards her daughter-in-law and giggled cheerfully, almost girlishly. Their love was not like an all-consuming passion. They didn't need to be with each other every minute, every second of their lives. They didn't demand or expect sacrifice and self-denial from each other. It was enough for them that they had each other, and neither he nor she needed anything more. Although Mary did try to get something from her husband, without success. "You know, you really ought to get checked out properly," This is no joke, you know. And you're not exactly young anymore, let's say. Well, you've brought problems upon yourself, Mary grumbled. You lived without a care, and now look, a medical commission at home. Stop it. I'm perfectly fine. And anyway, the less you know, the better you sleep, he laughed. She shook her head disapprovingly. Words worthy of a teenager. All right, I won't force you. You're a big boy. It's your life. Mary still managed to get Robert to undergo an examination. There he was examined for a long and tedious time, sat down, laid down, had some clips and suction cups attached, and then the results were scrutinized with a thoughtful expression. As a result, he was told to avoid heavy exertion, eat less fried, smoked, spicy, and salty foods. In short, everything that tasted good. However, Robert didn't delve into the details at all. He just wanted to calm Mary down. He was also prescribed some pills, which he, with an honest face, swore to Mary he would take regularly and naturally immediately forgot about as soon as he left the house. Robert loved Mary very much and was completely happy. She, as far as he could tell, was quite content with life and would have been happy too, if not for one but. She desperately wanted a child, but despite all their efforts, a baby remained only a dream for now. Don't be so upset. We'll manage. What's the rush? Robert said, sitting next to Mary on the sofa. My own parents had me when they were almost 40. And look how I turned out. Do you have any complaints about me? Only factual ones, please. Jokester. Mary lightly tapped her husband's head with her fist. Always joking. Well, yes, you certainly have no need to rush, she said, shaking her head sadly. You, my dear man, only men and wine get better with age. But I'm a woman, you see. I only get older with the years. What nonsense. Where did you pick up such foolishness? Robert looked at his wife in surprise. It's not foolishness. It's the truth. Do you know what they call women like me in medicine if they're expecting a child? She looked at her husband questioningly. Elderly primigravida. She clearly pronounced the unpleasant word and smiled bitterly. So you have everything ahead of you, but I need to get moving. And you, by the way, too. She shook off her despondency and, as was her custom, ended the difficult conversation with a joke. Hear that, my beloved husband. Get moving. She jumped up from the sofa and stood before him, fists on her hips. Robert looked at his wife, girlishly slender, thin, light, with a mass of red hair that hadn't faded with age at all. He looked at her dear face, looked into her eyes, in which, as one of their friends said, devil's dance, and felt a familiar, demanding, irresistible desire that hadn't diminished over the years. He jumped up, grabbed his beloved, and it was as if higher powers had heard this conversation. Exactly 9 months later, the elderly primigravida wife who carried her entire pregnancy like a 20-year-old girl gave birth to a boy easily and quickly. Dazed by the unfamiliar emotions, thoughts, and anxieties, Robert held his son for the first time, looking fearfully at the pink, wrinkled face. The answer was an unexpectedly serious gaze. Redhead, the happy father exclaimed. He's a redhead, just like you. He's not a redhead at all. Mary took the baby from her husband, who stood awkwardly bent over, like all new fathers, afraid to move and drop the precious bundle. He's just golden, our golden boy. They named their son Daniel. Long awaited. Suffered for, late of course, he was the light in his parents' window, a joy and a hope, Daniel grew into a healthy and intelligent boy. He didn't shine with special talents, but he studied without failing, meaning he was normal. He drew quite well, strummed the guitar, and with enthusiasm, like all boys, played computer games, but at least he didn't become addicted. He allowed his parents to take him to the Dasha with some pleasure, where shashlik and pie awaited him. However, these joint family evenings and trips for three happened less and less often. The reason was his father's busy work, his business. By the time Daniel turned 10, Robert was firmly on his feet, owning several workshops and car service centers. And it all started with that very workshop of Uncle Frank's, where he began working part-time from his first year at the institute. Childless, much older, Uncle Frank completely handed over his workshop to his nephew a few years after Robert finished the institute. He negotiated the right to come at any time and, if he wished, as he put it, shake off the dust by getting involved in some simple repair. True, in most cases, Uncle Frank's visits were limited to discussing his nephew's skill and business acumen. Look at that, he would explain passionately and with pleasure to some old client or friend. It was me who made him get into all this back then. Without me, he'd be shuffling papers somewhere now. But with me, he became a master. And what a master. See, honestly, he's already bought equipment there. It doesn't even fit in the premises anymore. You hear him. He tells me, "Uncle," he says, "I'm opening a second workshop. I'm going to build a chain of services." What a fool. You hear that? Can you imagine how they'll tax him now? And he'll take out more loans for the equipment and for the rent and for the salaries of all those idlers. Does he need that? He should sit quietly, turn nuts and bolts for bread and caviar. After all, he has golden hands and a head on his shoulders. God bless him. But no, he's getting into God knows what. Uncle Frank will be seized by a smoker's cough, shaking his head indignantly and waving his arms, his eyes glowing with pride for his nephew. Robert's business was large and troublesome, and it took up more and more of his time. "Darling, there's something Daniel and I have thought about it, discussed it, and decided to get a dog," Mary said, looking carefully at her husband, who had unexpectedly stayed home that evening and hadn't rushed off somewhere, as usual, on an urgent call. "A dog?" Robert was shocked and indignant. "Do you have any idea what having a dog in the house means? It's noise, fuss, fur, dirt, bringing all sorts of germs into the house." He thought for a moment and added for some reason, "Fur everywhere, you understand. And most importantly, you have to walk it, the dog, every day." Mary looked at her husband mockingly, and at his last phrase, she burst out laughing. "Every day? Really?" She shook her head, playfully feigning surprise. "I honestly don't know what to say. You've simply astonished me. Imagine walking it every day. I always thought dogs only pee once a week, take it out on Tuesday, say, and forget about it until next week." "Are you mocking me?" Robert stated, looking at his wife, who was shaking with quiet laughter. He actually liked dogs, but he preferred to do so at a distance, abstractly, so to speak. As it happened, he never had pets as a child or a young man. True, when he was about 12, to his considerable dismay, he was given an aquarium with fish, which, despite all his efforts, somehow quickly and quietly died. Robert felt a strange inner relief then, which, of course, he carefully hid from his family. Keeping a dog, in his understanding, was an extremely complicated matter, involving endless chores and the necessity of doing things he absolutely didn't want to do. For example, dragging himself out into the rain and slush instead of lying on a comfortable sofa under a cozy, fluffy blanket and watching his favorite movie. Why do you need this? Robert made another attempt to influence his wife. Why do you need another dog? Don't you have enough worries with us? Mary looked into his eyes. I don't have enough worries. Can you believe it? And especially, I don't have enough of you. Mary withdrew her hands, moved away, and sat on a stool. And then she suddenly added in a completely different tone. Hearing it, Robert looked up at her in surprise. He had never heard such a voice from her. Dry, somehow alien. I don't understand why you're worried about the inconveniences associated with having a dog. You're never home anyway. What difference does it make to you who lives here? He gasped in indignation. And Mary, without letting him object, continued. I've wanted to talk to you for a long time, my dear. Let's talk now since things have turned out this way. We miss you. Do you understand? Both of us. All your endless trips, business trips. You've been coming home just to sleep for a long time now. And even then, we don't even see you at night. Do you think I don't know you've taken to sleeping on the sofa in the living room? Darling, I do that so I don't wake you up. Robert looked at his wife with indignation. He was very hurt that everything he considered his great personal sacrifice for the sake of the family was now being held against him. Darling, I work like a dog. I earn money for you actually, so you can have everything. Robert was almost shouting. I do all this for you. For you, by the way. You don't have to do it for me, Mary replied softly. Do you hear? If you want to do something for me, for Daniel, just please be with us more often and longer. Robert's throat somehow tightened. Darling, I'll try, he said, and added, Forgive me, my dear. Try. I forgive you. Mary looked up at him, tucked her unruly red strands behind her ears with a familiar gesture, and added mockingly, And we're getting a dog anyway. A couple of weeks later, a funny, fat Labrador puppy, tripping over his own paws, appeared in the house. Oh, you even chose a dog that looks like you, just as red. Robert stumbled, laughing foolishly. The Labrador's eyes were circling a certain coffee table with suspicious persistence. A plastic folder with business papers was clearly lying there, within the puppy's reach. Robert disliked the dog's intense attention to it. You're both somehow, well, in short, it's good to be with you. Robert wriggled out and immediately jumped up with a sorrowful yelp. The puppy needed only a second to snatch the coveted folder from the table and try to disappear with it into the depths of the apartment. Even when grabbed by the scruff, the dog tried to defend his prize. The folder, finally in Robert's hands, was already considerably chewed and slobbered on. Darling, I take back my words, he shouted. With you, yes, it's good. But with this parasite, it's impossible. What a scoundrel. And how did he manage to chew, tear, and slobber on everything so much in just a few seconds? The puppy sat behind Mary's legs with an almost human grin on his face, and she laughed cheerfully. This was just the beginning. While the dog was growing, Robert lost count of the ruined shoes, the scratched wallpaper, And as for how many carelessly left documents the tail shredder ruined, it was beyond counting. At the same time, the dog persistently chose items that belonged to the head of the family. He just loves you. You understand? He loves you in a special way. That's why he chooses things that are yours, that smell like you. Mary chuckled, comforting her husband. Well, then I should be the one to beat him, Robert joked grimly, sadly examining the latest evidence of the puppy's special love for him. And yet, Mary, as always, was right. The dog became a true friend to all of them and even brought their already happy family closer together. Everything collapsed in an instant. Mary was hit by a car driven by a drunken snot-nosed kid. She was taken to the hospital in critical condition, where she died a few minutes later. Robert learned of his wife's death by phone. They called him from her mobile phone. "Darling, hi!" he shouted into the receiver, answering the call. "Listen, you're always scolding me, but imagine I've thrown everything aside and bought tickets for the three of us to the sea. We're flying on Monday. Go on, arrange your leave at the hospital, urgently. Hello, can you hear me?" He suddenly fell silent, feeling rather than hearing the suspicious silence on the line. And suddenly, he became scared. The silence suddenly turned into something sticky and suffocating. It seemed to envelop him, making his heart beat faster and faster. "Excuse me," an unfamiliar male voice said on the phone. "Are you Mr. Name?" "Yes," Robert wheezed back, his voice suddenly hoarse. "And is Name your relative? Is this your spouse?" "No, this is my wife," he replied, not understanding the word spouse, his mind blank. What spouse was his beloved? A spouse was something large, awkward, tiresome, like an old wardrobe. But she was his wife, his beloved, his friend, his sunshine, his happiness for life. "I'm very sorry, but I have to inform you. An accident. She died without regaining consciousness. Unfortunately, there was nothing we could do." The strange voice continued to say something, and Robert held the phone, gripping it with his fingers, trying to grasp one simple thought. His wife, his beloved, his friend, his happiness for life was gone. The following days passed in a haze, a fog. He went somewhere or drove, did something, responded to words, handshakes, calls from people. And he couldn't shake the feeling that it was his double doing all this, while he, the real one, watched everything from the side. He saw his double collect the body from the hospital, saw this same double sit silently next to the coffin, escort her to the cemetery, and lower her into the grave. Then he, this same double, returned home, walked the despondent dog, hugged him, lay down on the sofa, and closed his eyes. The morning after the funeral, Robert was completely alone. Even that imaginary double, who had seemingly done all the hard work for him and seen his beloved off on her last journey, had disappeared. The morning was sunny and bright. Robert woke up because a sunbeam was dancing across his face, tickling and blinding him. "Who didn't close the curtains yesterday?" "Some housewife," he muttered, getting out of bed. "Something's wrong with my mood. Didn't sleep well or something. And she ran off somewhere early in the morning. I wish she'd come back soon," he thought, lazily. "She won't come, never. You'll never see or hear her again. Never." The thought flashed mercilessly in his head. And as if in response to this thought, something tore in his chest with unbearable pain, seemingly crushing his ribs and tearing his insides. The frightened dog darted around his owner, lying on the floor, yelping softly. A scared, sleepy Daniel ran in at the sound of the yelp, called an ambulance, which fortunately arrived on time. After the heart attack, Robert, thinner and quieter, realized he would have to learn to live again. To learn not to think in the mornings why his wife wasn't calling them for breakfast. To get out of the habit of waiting for weekends to rush out of town, the three of them, he, Daniel, and Mary, taking the dog along. Not to remember that this American movie shouldn't be put on because his wife couldn't stand the actor in the lead role. He was literally going mad from these constant, uncontrollable lapses into the past and painful returns from there back to reality where she wasn't. Having recovered a little, Robert started going not to the office, but to the car workshop. And the old, faithful trade to which he had been devoted for so many years reciprocated. It welcomed him like a good friend, occupied his hands, time, and thoughts. Robert gladly pulled on his old greasy overalls, which he hadn't worn for many years, and to the astonishment of the mechanics and everyone else who looked at him like a demigod, he climbed into the automotive pit. At first, the service workers looked at him with surprise. They felt awkward in his presence. The eyes of those around him clearly read, "What's gotten into him? It's nonsense. The man has money to burn, and he's sitting under cars up to his ears in machine oil, bruising all his fingers, eating God knows what. It's all incomprehensible, strange. And anyway, he's hanging around unnecessarily, now can't even sneak out for a smoke." Days passed, months went by, and he continued to work regularly in the workshop for several hours a day alongside everyone else. Accustomed to the owner's presence, the workers greeted him warmly and sincerely and respectfully called him among themselves. If he, busy with his main large affairs, didn't come to the workshop, they understood that he was already missed. "Hi!" the mechanics shouted to the incredibly beautiful female secretary from the central office. "Do you need the boss? He's in Bay 3 today." Olivia, already used to it, rushed in the indicated direction with a stack of documents. Work binges. That's what the firm's employees jokingly called the times when Robert disappeared into the workshop. "Gone mad!" Uncle Frank, now very old but still working, diagnosed him. "Boy, you were a fool! And you've stayed one even though your head is gray now. You're the owner. Why are you clanking around with metal?" "What else should I do? Shuffle papers?" Robert chuckled. "And who taught me my whole life that I should be doing a man's job?" "Well, I'm not backing down from my words, but you're... In short," Uncle Frank was clearly flustered, "it's still somehow wrong. It's because you're alone. You're lonely. That's why you're acting out. You need a woman." Uncle Frank, with his directness and spontaneity, hit a sore spot. Robert was indeed very lonely. When Mary was with him, he wasn't alone for a single second of his life. He felt they were together, even if she was far away, but the pain was there. Eleanor and the dog, of course, were nearby, but Daniel, his only beloved precious son, did not fill the emptiness that had appeared in his father's life. For some reason, the death of their mother didn't bring father and son closer, as it seemed it should have, but on the contrary, it separated them. The 16-year-old Daniel, having grieved for his mother loudly and demonstratively, withdrew into himself, into his own world. To his father's attempts to talk, to get closer, Daniel replied with rude frankness, "Dad, let's be honest. You can't replace Mom for me anyway. And you were always a so-so father. No, regarding money and all that, I have no questions for you, let's be fair. But don't try to get inside me." Robert learned. Daniel was quite decent, didn't demand anything extra, and didn't have any bad or suspicious habits. But the feeling that he was living in the same apartment with an almost stranger, a completely unknown person, didn't leave Robert. He should have been beaten black and blue. Uncle Frank, as always, expressed himself simply and categorically. But what's the point now? And only the faithful dog, waiting for his master to come home, wildly happy at his arrival, reminded him of his past happy life. On one of his binge days, Robert finally kicked the office workers, who had been bothering him with various questions for a long time, out of the workshop, and happily immersed himself in a complex engine repair. The work completely absorbed him, and he didn't immediately notice the female voice coming from the direction of the small manager's office. I called, "You booked me for a repair, and now you won't take my car? This is outrageous. I won't leave on principle, do you hear?" "Hello," Robert said, wiping his hands as he walked toward the workshop employee who was listening to the woman with a pained expression. The lady, judging by everything, was very irritated and accompanied her words with energetic gestures. "May I ask what happened?" He looked at the woman and smiled kindly. However, it wasn't difficult to smile at her sincerely. Despite her nervous mood, the lady turned out to be a pretty young woman of about 25 with huge gray eyes, a turned-up nose, and long, light, fluffy bangs that she constantly blew out of her face with a funny, loud exhale. "Hello," she turned sharply to Robert. "Another specialist. Do I have to tell my story to everyone here? Maybe instead of chattering, one of you will finally get to my car." "My dear girl," Robert said softly, and was inwardly very surprised by the thoughtlessly yet completely sincerely uttered word. After his wife's death, he had never felt anything remotely similar to emotions toward any woman. "I'm not your dear girl," the lady interrupted him decisively. "All right, not dear. Young lady." Robert didn't let himself be thrown off balance. "Let's calm down and figure out the situation. What happened after all?" "Tell it again," she gasped indignantly. "Chris!" Robert looked questioningly at the manager standing next to him, who had been staring at the problem the whole time. "It's simple." Chris stepped forward decisively. "The client..." He glanced at the piece of paper he held in his hand. "The client did book with us, but unfortunately, she incorrectly stated the make of her car during the phone call, and now it's all clear. I tried to explain to the lady that we can't repair her car because we don't have the equipment for that make. She needs to go to a dealership service center, but the client doesn't want to listen to me." Well, there you have it. Chris spread his hands, his whole demeanor indicating what he thought of some ladies who didn't understand anything and didn't want to listen to intelligent people. Understood. Robert, having listened to Chris, shifted his gaze to the woman and smiled slightly. "Client, I'm not mistaken, am I? I'm afraid we really can't help you. But I'll write you the address now, call there, and I think... Listen, I don't care what you think. Your sign says car service, right?" She pointed expressively at her car. car, right? So, what does that mean? She looked at Robert ironically. It means you're going to fix it. Chris snorted, trying to suppress laughter. Nonsense, the woman muttered, feigning inflexibility, although it was already clear she was tired of arguing. But she decided to have the last word. Fine, I promise I won't let this go. I'll complain to your superiors, and not just some manager or some other boss. I'll complain to your owner, the proprietor, I don't know. In short, whoever is in charge here. Really, it's just unbelievable. A client comes and they refuse them. What kind of business is this? She looked indignantly at the workshop workers who were suppressing laughter and who, having started listening to the conversation, were now eagerly waiting to see how it will end. Well, that's your right. In that case, to not put things off, allow me to introduce myself, Robert began. What do I care about you? She stamped her foot in indignation. Her rather high heel twisted. The girl swayed and would have fallen if Robert hadn't caught her arm. A light, barely perceptible scent of tart perfume wafted towards him, and her silky hair brushed his cheek for a second. And suddenly, he felt excitement and surprise. He was alive again, immersed in these forgotten sensations, a little frightened by them. He didn't immediately understand what she was saying. The woman snatched her arm, which he was still holding, away from him and said, Well, get ready. You and you. She quickly pointed a finger at Chris and Robert. I'll make sure you're fired. Is that clear? She looked back indignantly at the now openly laughing service workers. The next day, in the morning, he was working in his office at the firm's central headquarters and was hardly surprised when the door burst open and a woman entered rapidly with a stubborn expression on her face. Hello? I understand you're the owner of the car service? She sat down decisively in the chair opposite him. Well, I have to tell you, with employees like the ones you have there, you'll soon be out of business. I bring my car, and they refuse to take it. The model, you see, isn't the right one. They become completely insolent, especially one guy there. Not young. Instead of doing his job, he decided to get acquainted with me, as if I care what his name is. Just tell, she stopped mid-sentence with a bewildered smile, finally looking at Robert. A few seconds later, with a gesture he now recognized, she swept her two long bangs from her face and smiled shyly. Oh, it's you, the woman said in astonishment. Yes, it's me. My name is Robert. And yours is Sarah, I remember. He stood up from his desk and bowed gallantly. You're a jokester. You're the owner of this establishment, it turns out. Then why were you dressed like that at the workshop? It's strange. Well, why strange? It's quite normal. It would be strange if I work in the workshop in a suit. All right, let's leave my strange behavior aside. Let's better decide what we should do about you. Meaning? She asked, surprised. Well, how? You probably understand I can't fulfill your demand to fire everyone, including myself, Robert said seriously. The woman looked at him and unexpectedly burst out laughing. The laughter was so sincere and contagious that Robert involuntarily laughed with her, easily and cheerfully, as he hadn't laughed in 2 years. Well, yes, I suppose my complaint is hopeless, the woman said, still sniffling from laughter. All right, well, Mr. Robert, it was nice meeting you, despite everything. She stood up from the chair and extended her hand to him. He took her thin, narrow hand in his and involuntarily covered it with his other hand and held it. Sarah, forgive my boldness, but perhaps you would agree to have dinner with me as compensation for not repairing your car. After all, I must respond to your complaint, right? He said, astonished himself by his words. For the first time since Mary's death, Robert suddenly wanted to talk to a woman, to touch her hand again, to feel the light, subtle scent of perfume with some unusual tart fragrance. This was a completely new sensation for him. His whole life, only two women had existed for him, his mother and his wife. All other representatives of the weaker sex, even the most beautiful and intelligent, were just people to him. He was hopelessly lost to romantic adventures. Female charms, which had been tried on him repeatedly, simply didn't work. He loved his wife, wanted to be only with her, and thoughts of experiencing new sensations related to women simply didn't occur to him. Well, if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's his faithfulness. Mary had laughed at the time. Your husband, by the way, is a catch. Where is he now? Do you even know? At work, you say? Oh, watch out. You'll sit around in your sweatpants and someone will steal your man. Well, if they do, then it's fate, Mary replied philosophically, but she was being sly. For some reason, she was completely confident in her husband, and every day she saw in his eyes that her confidence was justified. So, do you accept the offer? He looked into the woman's face and smiled. You know I do, she suddenly replied. The young woman was charming. At the same time, she made no attempt to make a special impression on Robert to charm or seduce him. She seemed completely unconcerned about whether her hair was perfectly styled or if she had eaten all her lipstick along with her steak. By the way, she had an excellent appetite, and in her company, Robert ate with genuine pleasure for the first time in 2 years. Despite the age difference of more than 20 years, they found an astonishing number of common topics for conversation. For example, Sarah learned about the dog and was absolutely delighted, turning out to be an old dog person. Despite the somewhat scandalous beginning of their acquaintance, she turned out to be a light, cheerful, kind person. I don't know what came over me, she laughed. Recalling the scene she had caused at the workshop, truly, I've never acted like that before. It was as if I went off the rails. Please forgive me. But firstly, it's Robert, not Mr. Robert. We agreed, he gently corrected her. And secondly, because of your spectacular appearance, I'm glad everything turned out this way. And I'm glad, very glad, Sarah suddenly replied. A year later, Robert, looking younger, with shining eyes and squared shoulders, sat in his office, holding a small velvet box. Inside lay a luxurious ring. A ring for her. I love her. I love her, he thought. Maybe as much as I love Mary, or almost as much. I don't know. What's the point of comparing? I just want her to be by my side as my wife, always, or at least for as long as it lasts. He became agitated, jumped up, and paced around the office. Okay, what if she says yes? What if she just ignores my age, everything, and says yes? She's like that, she can't. What will I do? Robert was afraid to voice the most important, essentially the only problem. Daniel. Daniel and his possible reaction to all this, to a new woman, to a father who suddenly decided to continue living, not just live out his days. Daniel, I need to talk to you. Every word was a huge effort for Robert. He couldn't sit still, jumped up, and walked around the room. He went to the window, deliberately and carefully adjusted the fold of the curtain. Then he walked back to the armchair he had just been sitting in, sat down, but after a couple of seconds, stood up again. Daniel hadn't said a word the whole time, watching his father. The silence was clearly dragging on. "Dad," Daniel finally said, "maybe you'll tell me what you wanted." "What did I want to say?" Robert repeated senselessly, nervously straightening the perfectly ironed collar of his shirt on his chest. His hand was noticeably trembling. "Daniel, well, it's hard for me to talk about this, but I want to be honest with you. I'm really counting on you to support and understand me. In short, I've met a woman," he finally said. What seemed to him the most difficult words of his life. "She's good, smart, decent, beautiful. In short, I like her very much, and strangely enough, she seems to like me too. I'd like to introduce you to her," Robert mumbled, not daring to look up at Daniel. "What about Mom?" came from above him. "What about Mom?" "Daniel." He finally looked into his son's eyes. "Mom is gone. She's been gone for a long time. I love your mother very much, Daniel, very much. And I still love her and miss her terribly. You know that perfectly well." "Miss her? Really? Well, imagine that." Daniel snorted ironically. "But I see that doesn't stop you from starting affairs. Don't you dare talk to me in that tone." Robert found the strength to look sternly at his son. "And choose your words, please." "Listen, father." Daniel called him father for the first time in his life, not dad. And this unfamiliar, somehow alien, almost forged word grated unpleasantly on Robert's ears. "Maybe this is some kind of joke? You're playing a trick on me, aren't you? Come on, admit it." "No, Daniel, I'm not playing a trick on you. This isn't a joke. I really want to introduce you to her. I don't want to meet anyone," the boy shouted. "Not anyone, but someone else," Robert corrected his son. "It doesn't matter. I don't care. I don't give a damn. You understand? Don't you dare bring her here. Got it?" Daniel yelled. "All right then." Robert stood up from the armchair and paced around the room. He barely restrained himself from slapping his son. "I dare remind you that this is my apartment, and I will decide what I do, both now and later. Do you hear me?" He looked at Daniel. "And if you don't like something, well, let's decide, will we live together anymore or not?" Robert's voice didn't tremble and didn't betray the turmoil that was raging in his soul and head. It seemed he managed to appear decisive and firm because Daniel stopped shouting and watched his father silently and attentively. And then he blurted out, "Are you really going to kick me out of the house because of some—" "Be careful, Daniel," Robert interrupted him sharply. "Be careful. Think before you say something that can't be excused or fixed later. Dad, what are you doing? You're already past 50, and your heart is acting up." Daniel, obviously changing tactics, brought out the heaviest, most ruthless arguments. "What kind of courting can there be at your age? It's time for you to retire, think about your pension, and you suddenly decided to start courting women in your old age," Daniel almost shouted, having completely crossed all boundaries. Robert listened to his son's hysterical outbursts. Of course, Daniel, overwhelmed by resentment and jealousy towards a strange woman, was clearly overdoing it, with the maximalism with which 16-year-olds judge older generations. The boy was talking utter nonsense. And yet, Robert clearly understood the wall of rejection and misunderstanding he was about to face. Lord, what am I doing? He suddenly thought clearly, continuing to listen to his son's shouts. What am I doing? She's half my age. And Daniel's reaction is typical? Everyone will think this, if not say it. Absolutely everyone. Yes, of course. I'll marry you, darling, Sarah exclaimed with delight, abandoning all modesty. I really want to be your wife. Thank you, darling. I'm so happy. Only please forgive me. We need to talk. He struggled to find and push out the words, although he had already rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in his mind. Darling, you see, I'm, to put it mildly, not a young man, he mumbled. I understand perfectly. Perfectly. I'm not a girl either, she chuckled. Darling, my dear. But you know what I mean? He sighed painfully. Yes, I know, of course. Her voice became hard. You are significantly older, and I am unforgivably young, and I'm marrying you solely for your money to take everything you have and run off abroad with a young lover. Yes, and another thing, you have a bad heart. I can take advantage of that, finish you off, and voila, I'm the heir to everything. People will definitely tell you that many times too. Darling, he exclaimed. No, let's talk. Let's say all this nastiness out loud. I know all this perfectly well, darling. And I also know that you are ruining everything right now. You are ruining, possibly, the happiest moment of my life. My dear, sweet Robert, let's do this. Sarah wiped away her tears, lifted her face, and looked him intently in the eyes. Either you trust me completely, in my sincerity, in my feelings for you, or right now we say goodbye to each other. He looked into her eyes and believed her, once and for all. At least, at that moment, he thought it was forever. She moved into their large apartment, and Daniel, by that time a second-year student, was living in a dormitory. The relationship between Daniel and his new wife, despite all Robert's hopes, was, to put it mildly, separate. He and his new wife and Daniel. Even more unclear and unpredictable. Something was clearly happening between Daniel and his new wife, and Robert tried many times to find out exactly what. Daniel? What's going on? Listen, Father, I'm a man. You yourself just pointed that out to me. Yes, I helped. Daniel snorted ironically. Well, actually, you created this problem yourself. You're talking about her. I'm talking about my life. That's it. Leave me alone. Daniel cut him off. Daniel, don't you dare talk to me like that. Robert tried to call his son to order and immediately gave up. Daniel, how about I buy you an apartment? Failing to get anything from his son, he tried another approach. Darling, we need to talk. What's happening between you and Daniel? My dear, I won't say everything is perfect, but in principle, nothing terrible is happening. It's a typical stepson story. Well, you know, stepmothers are never good, but I'm trying very hard. And anyway, she trailed off. Robert felt that something very important was hidden behind Daniel's aggression and his new wife's jocularity. And this something didn't let Robert live in peace. It bothered him like a sore tooth. And so he sat on a bench in the park, stroked the dog's golden ears, and thought about what he should do. How could he understand what was happening in his house? And if he suddenly heard something resembling the truth from one of them, he simply wouldn't have the courage to believe it. he had to see and understand everything himself by himself. And he will have to do it without Daniel's and Sarah's knowledge, however unpleasant it was to secretly spy on them. Mark, hello. Robert dialed his deputy's number. Can you give me the phone number of the company that installed our video surveillance system? The next day, a quick-witted young man taught Robert the intricacies of surveillance. The camera is tiny, you can install it anywhere. Better higher up so it's not accidentally bumped. He lowered his voice mysteriously. No sound, but the image will be top quality at any distance. The company guarantees it. Having installed the camera in the living room of the apartment, Robert went to work, sank tiredly into the armchair in his office, and turned on his laptop. There was no sound, but the image was clear, just as the technician had promised. Daniel was the first to come home. He wandered around the apartment, then returned to the living room and settled directly opposite the camera, turning on the huge wall-sized television. The boy sat on the sofa in a relaxed, casual pose. Alone in the apartment, he had no need to play the role of the offended or the deprived. His face, so much like his mother's, so dear and precious, caused the man watching the monitor a pang of aching, sharp love for his son. He painfully wanted to drop everything, run home, grab this long-legged, tousle-haired, snub-nosed creature, his boy, and hug him tightly, to ask forgiveness for everything done and not done, to say how much he loved his son. Immersed in his feelings, Robert didn't immediately realize that something was happening in the apartment. Daniel's posture changed. He remained on the sofa, but he was tense, as if bristling. The usual gloomy, angry grimace appeared on his face. Instead of the sweet, nice boy, a copy of his mother, a wary, angular young man sat on the sofa, literally radiating anxiety and aggression. Sarah entered the room. Judging by the movement of their lips, they were talking. She smiled slightly, apparently asking Daniel something. He, lounging further on the sofa and putting his feet up on the glass table, put a crooked smirk on his face and evidently replied, squinting and barely parting his lips. She turned and left the room. Robert couldn't hear what they were saying, but one thing was obvious. Daniel was not at all like a miserable outcast with an evil stepmother. And Sarah had clearly not turned into a fury in her husband's absence. Rather, it seemed that Daniel was behaving in his usual rude manner, and she was trying to smooth things over with patience and calmness. Robert, not knowing why, continued to watch Daniel sitting in the living room. Daniel suddenly looked in the direction where Sarah had gone out, stood up, and moved cautiously, clearly trying not to make noise, towards his father's office. Disappearing from the frame, he reappeared on the monitor a couple of minutes later. One hand was shoved into his jeans pocket, and it looked very much like he had just put something in there. The familiar dull ache in his chest on the left side began. Robert gasped. At that moment, he suddenly felt like an ancient elder without the strength to even move his legs. So it was Daniel who had betrayed him. Daniel, not his new wife. Daniel was tormenting her, and it seemed was quietly taking money from the safe in the office. Well, at least that was easy enough to find out. That same evening, upon returning home, Robert discovered that a rather significant amount had considerably dwindled in the few weeks he hadn't looked in his safe. He didn't speak to Daniel, but just waited, not knowing what for. And he waited. A few days later, he saw Daniel carry a small rectangular box out of the office, which contained his mother's few but expensive jewels, which his father had given her. Eleanor loved wearing jewelry, calling it our fund. I need to talk to you, Robert said the next evening. Well, Daniel snapped back as usual. Money has started disappearing from the house, and not just money. To Daniel's credit, he tried his best to appear calm and indifferent, but he wasn't very good at it. Why are you so sure I took the money? Daniel smiled awkwardly, or rather bared his teeth, hiding his fear behind it. There's another person in the apartment. A complete stranger, by the way. Maybe we should ask her? Maybe our young wife doesn't have enough? All right then, Robert said, through clenched teeth, feeling the familiar dull pain in his chest. You can keep the money, of course, if it's still intact. Give back the jewelry and get out. Daniel left the room. After a few minutes, he returned. Here's all your money. He threw a wallet at his father's feet. I didn't take a single ruble. You can count it. And I won't give you the jewelry. I'll keep it. You can call the police and report a theft. I don't care. I won't give it back, even if they put me in prison. This is Mom's jewelry. I won't let some strange woman wear it. Do you hear? By the end of the sentence, Daniel's voice, trembling more and more, finally broke, and the boy, unable to bear it, sobbed. Robert stared at his son with wide eyes. The shell of bitterness, cynicism, and lies seemed to peel away from Daniel before his eyes. Standing before him was his beloved only son, his and Mary's, their golden boy, confused and lost in his fantasies and delusions, but still his own, still hopelessly missing his mother. He had driven this longing so deep inside himself that it had turned into hatred. Hatred for his father, his new wife, for the entire world around him where his mother wasn't. Daniel, forgive me, Robert said softly. Daniel looked up at his father, his face wet with tears, and said softly in a barely audible whisper, "And you forgive me, Dad. Forgive me for this. And for her. I love you, Dad." Robert took a few steps and squeezed his son's outstretched hand with all his might, and around them jumped, barking happily and gleaming with golden fur, not knowing what he was so happy about, the dog.